Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the murky world of historical hygiene, where the concept of a daily shower wasn't just absent, it was actively avoided. You're standing in a crowded medieval marketplace. The press of bodies around you emanating a complex bouquet that would make your modern nose recoil in horror. The air is thick with the mingled aromas of unwashed humanity, animal waste, an open sewage, a cocktail so potent that you probably would survive your first deep.
Nice.
Breath without gagging uncontrollably. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, so drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're about to witness the Great Unwashed Awakening. A gradual shift in European attitudes toward personal cleanliness that would shape hygiene habits for centuries. It might surprise you to learn that the early Middle Ages weren't particularly averse to bathing. You're a typical person in 10th century Europe. And while you're not scrubbing up daily, you do visit communal bathhouses with some regularity. These establishments, inherited from Roman traditions, serve both hygienic and social functions. You sit in warm water, chatting with neighbors, perhaps enjoying a cup of ale as you soak away the grime of medieval existence. But as you move forward in time, something curious happens. You notice bathhouses becoming less common, less visited, and increasingly viewed with suspicion. By the 14th century, you're witnessing a dramatic reversal in bathing attitudes. The once popular bathhouses are now associated with two things Europeans have begun to fear: intensely, disease and moral corruption. You're living through the aftermath of the Black Death, which decimated Europe's population in the mid-1300s. Medical authorities of your time have developed a theory that water, especially warm water, opens the pores of your skin, making you vulnerable to illness. The pores are like little mouths, a physician explains to you with absolute certainty. And when opened by water, they swallow miasmas and corrupted airs that poison the blood. Historians still argue whether this fear alone was enough to turn the tide against bathing, or if other social factors played equally important roles. As you move into the 15th century, you hear church sermons condemning them as dens of iniquity, where the sins of the flesh flourish alongside steam and soap. What once was a mundane part of life has become morally suspect. You're witnessing the confluence of medical fear and moral panic, creating a perfect storm against personal hygiene. By 1500, you're living in a society where regular immersive bathing has become rare among most people. The wealthy still occasionally indulge in partial washing, perhaps a quick rinse of hands and face but full body. Immersion is increasingly viewed as dangerous and potentially sinful. In an odd historical twist that modern hygienists would find horrifying, you notice that many hospitals of this period have begun to forbid patients from bathing. Watch a doctor at the Hotel Dieu in Paris scold a nurse for attempting to wash a fever patient, insisting that such action would surely hasten death by allowing pestilence to enter through the skin. The fringe practice of dry cleaning begins to emerge as an alternative to water bathing. You observe people rubbing their bodies with dry linen cloths, believing this removes impurities without the dangers of opening the pores. Some particularly fastidious individuals change their linen undergarments frequently, subscribing to the theory that the fabric draws out bodily filth and carries it away when changed. You notice that as bathing declines, other practices rise to compensate. People begin to use perfumed powders, carry pomanders, increase their use of incense in homes. The wealthy commission special sweating rooms where they can perspire out impurities without the dangers of water. By the late 16th century, you are firmly in an era where avoiding water contact with the body has become the medical and social consensus. You've witnessed the great unwashed awakening, not an awakening to cleanliness, but rather to its deliberate avoidance. This shift in attitudes will persist with remarkable tenacity, shaping European hygiene practices for centuries to come. And as you drift through the next 500 years of history, you'll discover just how creative humans can be when it comes to justifying their aversion to soap and water. You're now entering the rarefied air of royal courts, where the stench of unwashed bodies mingles with the most expensive perfumes in the world. The royal stench chronicles begin in earnest around the 16th century, when Europe's monarchs, those supposedly divine beings, guiding nations, become some of the most notably malodorous individuals in recorded history. Take Queen Elizabeth I of England, whom you observed during her morning routine in 1580, the Virgin Queen, for all her magnificent gowns and jewels. Bathes perhaps once a month at most, and that's considered exceptionally clean by the standards of her time. You watch as her ladies-in-waiting perform her toilet, which consists mainly of wiping visible dirt from her face and hands with a cloth dampened with rose water. The Queen, like many of her noble contemporaries, believes that her periodic layer of grime actually protects her from disease. "The face pack is ready, Your Majesty," announces a lady-in-waiting, approaching with a concoction that makes you raise an eyebrow. It's a paste made from white lead and vinegar ceruse, they call it, which will be applied to the Queen's face and chest to create an artificially pale complexion. This toxic beauty treatment will slowly poison her over decades, but at least it covers the dirt and smallpox scars. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's famous red wig and heavy makeup were primarily fashion statements or practical solutions to hide the consequences of her hygiene practices. Moving to the French court a century later, you find yourself nearly overwhelmed by the competing odors in the Palace of Versailles. King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, is rumored to have taken only 3 baths in his entire 77-year life. You're standing in his bedchamber in 1670, watching as royal physicians advise against bathing, warning the king that water will weaken his royal constitution and allow illness to penetrate his sacred body. Instead, he changes his shirt several times daily and douses himself in perfume. The palace's famous Hall of Mirrors serves a dual purpose. You had unconsidered before the abundance of reflective surfaces helps bounce light around the massive space, but it also helps disperse the overwhelming human odors that accumulate when hundreds of unwashed nobles gather to curry favor with their equally unwashed monarch. You notice something particularly odd about Versailles. There are almost no bathrooms. Despite housing thousands of aristocrats and servants, the palace contains precious few facilities for waste elimination. You watch in mild horror as courtiers simply relieve themselves in corners, behind curtains or in pots that servants empty infrequently. The smell is so pervasive that visitors from less civilized countries often comment on it in their journals. While the French nobility seems completely desensitized, one particularly quirky tidbit from Louis XIV's escort involves a special guild of royal servants, whose job is to maintain the king's personal fragrance. These perfumers work tirelessly to create ever stronger scents to mask the natural odors of the unwashed monarch. Their workshops produce the famous Aqua Regis, potent mixture of civet, ambergris, and dozens of botanical ingredients that cost more per ounce than gold. You watch his servants sprinkle it, not just on the king, but throughout his chambers and even on documents he will touch. Moving eastward to the Russian court in the early 18th century, you observe Peter the Great's unusual predicament. Having traveled to Western Europe and adopted many of their customs, he attempts to introduce more frequent bathing among the Russian nobility. You witness his frustration as aristocrats resist, considering regular bathing a strange foreign practice beneath their dignity. In a moment of historical irony, the Russians who had maintained a tradition of steam baths for centuries are now influenced by Western, European anti-bathing sentiments, just as Peter tries to westernize them in other ways. Back in England, you attend the coronation of George I in 1714. Standing close enough to notice that the new king's ermine robes are crawling with lice, visible passengers that nobody dares mention. Royal launderers have developed specialized techniques for dealing with royal garments, including beating them with rods rather than washing them with water, believing this preserves both fabric and royal dignity. Among the royal courts, you discover a peculiar competition, emerging not for who can be the cleanest, but for who can create the most distinctive personal scent. Spain's Philip IV becomes known for his smell of amber and musk, while Catherine the Great favors a custom blend of citrus oils that servants spray in rooms before she enters. These signature scents become part of royal branding, as recognizable as crowns and scepters. The most innovative solution you observe comes from Sweden's Queen Christina, who, disliking both bathing and heavy perfumes, commissions a set of garments infused with herbs that release pleasant aromas when warmed by body heat. This clever approach clothing that becomes more fragrant rather than more foul with wear represents one of the more sophisticated responses to the no-bathing paradigm. As the 18th century progresses, you notice royal physicians beginning to document the skin diseases, infections, and parasitic conditions that plague their unwashed monarchs, though few make the connection to hygiene. Instead, these ailments are treated with increasingly elaborate ointments, poultices, and herbal remedies addressing symptoms while the underlying cause continues to reign, quite literally, unchallenged. You're sitting in on a theological debate at the University of Paris in 1485, where red-faced clerics pound tables as they argue about the morality of bathing. The church's relationship with cleanliness has always been complex. You're witnessing one of its most fascinating chapters unfold. The bath is the gateway to fornication, thunders one Dominican friar, his own bodily aroma suggesting a lifelong commitment to this philosophy. Water upon naked skin incites lust and weakens moral resolve. Several heads nod in vigorous agreement, though you notice a few skeptical glances exchanged among younger scholars. The church versus cleanliness debate intensified significantly during the late Middle Ages, creating a theological framework that would justify European dirtiness for centuries. You observe how Christian authorities increasingly associate bathing with several deadly sins: lust, pride, and sloth. By the 15th century, you're seeing religious tracts that explicitly condemn regular bathing as a form of worldly vanity. Saint Benedict's rule, which you find being discussed in a nearby monastery, originally included instructions for regular washing, but you watch as later interpretations emphasize the spiritual dangers of bodily indulgence. One abbot reads aloud from a commentary, "To wash too frequently reflects an unholy preoccupation with the vessel of sin that is the flesh. The practical result is that many religious communities that once maintained relatively good hygiene standards are now embracing filthiness as a form of piety. Yet as you wander through different monasteries across Europe, you discover an interesting contradiction. While public bathing is condemned, many monasteries maintain their own private bathhouses, though. They're used sparingly and with strict regulations. At the Cistercian Abbey of Clairvaux, you observe monks permitted to bathe only 4 times yearly on the eves of major festivals. The bathing ritual is conducted with prayers and in special garments that preserve modesty, a compromise between physical cleanliness and spiritual purity. One particularly quirky aspect of medieval religious hygiene you encounter involves the bath of souls concept. Listen as a priest explains that spiritual cleanliness far outweighs physical cleanliness, confession, and penance. Wash away sin much more effectively than water could ever clean the body. Some particularly devout individuals deliberately avoid washing as a form of mortification of the flesh, wearing their filth as a badge of religious devotion. Historians still argue whether this practice represented genuine piety or was simply a convenient theological justification for existing cultural preferences. You stumble upon a fascinating fringe movement within some religious communities, the Holy Stinkers. These were ascetics who believed that bodily odor was a sign of spiritual purity. The more one smelled, the closer one was to God. You meet one such holy man outside Milan, his matted hair and beard forming a filthy nest around a face that has unfelt water in decades. Pilgrims actually seek him out, believing his powerful stench indicates profound holiness. Labor embraced vermin as Christ embraced sinners, he tells you, referencing the 18th century ascetic who would later be canonized, despite or perhaps because of his legendary filthiness. The practical impact of religious anti-bathing sentiment extends far beyond monastery walls. You observe how parish priests preach against public bathhouses, describing them as sites of moral corruption where the sins of the flesh flourish. By the early 16th century, many European towns have closed their communal bathing facilities, not just due to disease fears, but because of religious pressure. In their place, you see an increase in public acts of penance, particularly during Lent, when unwashed bodies become physical manifestations of spiritual humility. Yet not all religious authorities agree with this interpretation. You sit in on a lecture by a Muslim physician in medieval Spain who quotes from Hadith emphasizing that cleanliness is half of faith. The contrast between Islamic bathing practices and Christian avoidance of water becomes a point of cultural friction in areas where the religions interact. You overhear Christian travelers returning from Jerusalem expressing shock at the regular bathing habits they observed among both Muslims and Jews. Some dismissing these practices as foreign excesses, while others secretly wonder if there might be some merit to them. The Jewish quarters of European cities. You note the continuation of ritual bathing traditions, despite the Christian majority's increasing aversion to water. The mikveh remains central to Jewish religious practice, creating another point of difference that occasionally fuels anti-Semitic sentiment. You overhear accusations that Jewish bathing customs are somehow connected to mysterious rites or even witchcraft. Rather than being recognized as basic hygiene practices, by the time the Protestant Reformation erupts in the early 16th century, attitudes toward bathing have become so intertwined with religious doctrine that reformers like Martin Luther occasionally address the topic. You listen as Luther takes a surprisingly moderate position, suggesting that while excessive bathing might indeed lead to moral laxity, Occasional washing for health purposes isn't inherently sinful. This nuanced view, however, does little to change established practices in most Protestant lands, where the aversion to regular bathing continues largely unabated. As religious justifications for avoiding water become deeply embedded in European culture, you observe how cleanliness and godliness, despite the later proverb, become increasingly disconnected in the Christian West. The body, seen primarily as a temporary vessel for the immortal soul, isn't deemed worthy of regular maintenance. This theological foundation for uncleanliness proves remarkably durable, persisting well into the age of scientific advancement, when new justifications would be needed to maintain old habits. You're standing in a Parisian tailor's workshop in 1650, watching a nobleman being fitted for an elaborate new outfit. The fashion over freshness movement is in full swing, and you're witnessing how clothing has evolved to compensate for and sometimes conceal the realities of unwashed bodies. The customer, yet he's investing a small fortune in yards of silk and embroidery that will transform him into a walking work of art. The collar must be higher, trying to hide a rash that's developed on his neck, a common consequence of prolonged uncleanliness. And ensure the sleeves are sufficiently puffy. You notice how the voluminous design of the garment creates distance between the body and the fabric, allowing air to circulate and mitigating the worst effects of body odor. It's fashion with a practical purpose, though few would openly admit the utility behind the style. As European avoidance of water reached its peak in the 17th and 18th centuries, clothing design responded with remarkable creativity. You observe how fabrics evolved, with linens worn closest to the body to absorb sweat and oils, while outer layers made from silk or wool were rarely, if ever, washed. A proper gentleman changes his shirt daily, your tailor informs you with a knowing look, while a proper lady changes her shift at least every third day. This, as each piece must be laboriously hand-washed by servants. You realize that cleanliness, by the late 17th century, you visit a wig maker's shop with a well-powdered wig in its place. One need not worry about lice or the unpleasant odors that emanate from an unwashed scalp. Historians still argue whether the popularity of wigs was primarily driven by fashion trends or at the practical benefits they offered in an era of questionable hair hygiene. The use of white powder, usually made from scented flour or starches, serves multiple purposes in this unwashed society, applied liberally to wigs. It absorbs oils and masks odors, while creating the fashionable pale appearance so desired by the elite. You watch a lady's maid apply powder to her mistress's artificial hairpiece, working it in with special tools designed to reach the innermost layers. The room fills with a cloud of white dust that settles on every surface, a small price to pay for social presentability. You notice a particularly quirky fashion innovation in the form of beauty patches, small pieces of black silk or velvet applied to the face with adhesive, originally used to cover smallpox scars. These patches evolve into elaborate decorative elements, sometimes cut into shapes like stars, moons, or hearts. What few people openly acknowledge is how effectively these beauty marks disguise skin blemishes and sores resulting from poor hygiene. The fabrics themselves become increasingly elaborate, with patterns and textures designed to camouflage inevitable staining. You observe how darker colors become popular for outer garments among the practical-minded, While visible white lace at collars and cuffs serves as evidence that the wearer can afford to regularly change and clean these small, visible portions of their attire, it's a careful illusion of cleanliness, maintained through strategic design choices. Women's fashion develops particular adaptations to the unwashed reality. You watch as hoop skirts and panniers create greater distance between bodies in crowded rooms, while fans become essential accessories not just for flirtation, but for wafting away unpleasant odors. In the most sophisticated circles, you'll learn of a complex fan language that includes signals for the smell is unbearable and let us move to fresher air. Courtly communications adapted to malodorous realities. Men's fashion evolves its own solutions. You observe how snuff-taking becomes widespread, ostensibly a refined habit, but one that conveniently deadens the sense of smell. Long-necked bottles of cologne are carried in specially designed pockets, allowing for discreet refreshment throughout the day. Handkerchiefs soaked in perfume are held casually to the nose during close conversations, a practice so common it ceases to be considered rude. One fringe fashion development you encounter involves sweat jewelry, specialized ornaments designed to collect and absorb bodily secretions. These pieces, worn at the neck, wrists, and underarms, feature absorbent materials in silver settings that can be removed and cleaned separately from garments, though never mainstream. These practical accessories find favor among certain forward-thinking aristocrats concerned with minimizing body odor. By the late 18th century, you, re-witnessing the fashion paradox, reach its peak. People of quality may spend the equivalent of a year's middle-class income on their appearance, while simultaneously adhering to hygiene practices that would horrify modern sensibilities. The elaborate construction of social presentation through clothing becomes an art form in itself, one born of necessity in a world where regular bathing remains unusual at best and dangerous at worst. You're wandering through a perfumer's workshop in Grasse, France, in the early 1700s, where the air is thick with competing scents, so powerful they make your eyes water. Perfumist Pungent Rise represents one of humanity, its most creative responses to the problem of bodily odor in an era when bathing was rare. The master perfumer, a small man with stained fingers and an unnaturally keen sense of smell, gestures to dozens of glass containers lining the walls. Each one, he tells you proudly, is a weapon in our war against nature's less pleasant aromas. Perfume in this unwashed era isn't just a luxury or a fashion statement, it's a necessity. It's a form of olfactory self-defense in a world where the human body's natural scents reign unchecked. You observe how perfume production has evolved into a sophisticated industry with techniques refined over centuries. The perfumer shows you his most precious ingredients: ambergris harvested from whale intestines, musk from the glands of male deer, and civet secretions collected from specialized cat-like animals kept in narrow cages. The most effective scents, he explains with a wink, come from nature's most unmentionable sources. One mainstream historical fact that surprises you is how perfume's function changed dramatically during the no-bathing centuries. In ancient times, in the early Middle Ages, scented products were primarily associated with religious ceremonies and medical treatments. You learn how the plague accelerated perfume's transformation into a hygiene substitute. When the Black Death swept through Europe, your perfumer recounts. Physicians recommended carrying pomanders' balls of scented materials to purify the corrupt air thought to spread disease. This medical origin lent perfume a respectable, even necessary status that helped it flourish. The process of creating these powerful scents is far more complex than you imagined. You watch apprentices crushing flower petals, steeping herbs, and carefully distilling essential oils. The most effective perfumes of this era aren't the light, subtle fragrances of modern times, but powerful, almost aggressive scents designed to overwhelm rather than complement natural body odor. A good perfume, your guide informs you, should enter the room before its wearer and remain after they've departed. A particularly quirky tidbit you discover involves the social hierarchy of scents. Different fragrances are considered appropriate for different classes: floral scents for young unmarried women, spicy aromas for mature ladies, musky blends for gentlemen of means. Using a scent above one's station can be considered as inappropriate as wearing clothing meant for a higher class. You overhear one aristocratic customer whispering disapprovingly about a merchant's wife who dared to wear orange. Blossom essence. It's as presumptuous as if she'd arrived in a coronet. As you move through European society, you notice that perfume application techniques have evolved into elaborate rituals. You observe a lady's maid spraying scent not just on her mistress's skin, but on her clothing. Wigs, handkerchiefs, and even her letters. Specialized porcelain figurines with hollow centers sit on bedside tables, slowly releasing fragrance throughout the night. Gentlemen carry perfumed leather gloves, the scent releasing with the warmth of their hands. The most dedicated, or perhaps the least naturally fragrant, have their carriage interiors regularly fumigated with burning scented woods. Historians still argue whether the extreme potency of historical perfumes was primarily due to the need to mask body odor or simply reflected different cultural preferences. You encounter evidence for both positions. Diaries complaining of headaches from overpowering fragrances at court gatherings, but also poetry praising the same intense scents as transcendently beautiful. The truth, as one perfumer confides to you, probably lies somewhere in between. We create beauty that serves necessity, or perhaps necessity that achieves beauty. You discover that perfume in this era extends far beyond personal application. Wealthy homes have their furniture regularly rubbed with scented oils, while balls of dried flowers and herbs are tucked into drawers and between linens. Public spaces combat their collective odors with burning incense or sprinkled scent waters. Even animals aren't exempted. Witness a lady carefully applying diluted lavender water to her lapdog, which appears to have never experienced an actual bath. A fringe practice you encounter among some particularly innovative. Nobles involve scent surgeries, small incisions made in the skin where perfume is directly applied, creating longer-lasting fragrance that emanates from the body itself. The physician performing this procedure assures you it's perfectly safe, though the suppurating wounds you observe on some clients suggest otherwise. The minor discomfort, he insists as he prepares his knife, is nothing compared to the social benefits. The economics of smelling acceptable creates new industries and trade routes. You follow the journey of jasmine flowers from cultivation to final product, watching as thousands of hand-picked blossoms yield just a few drops of precious oil. The value of these scent ingredients reaches astonishing levels at certain points in the 18th century. The most prized perfume components cost more by weight than gold. This creates a thriving black market in counterfeit fragrances, with less reputable perfumers substituting cheap alternatives like coal tar derivatives for authentic ingredients. By the late 18th century, you're witnessing perfume evolve into a complex language of social signals. Different scents are worn for different occasions, lighter fragrances for morning visits, more intense blends for evening gatherings. Certain combinations indicate romantic availability, while others suggest mourning or religious devotion. The most sophisticated members of society can identify not just the main components of a perfume, but which perfumer created it, using this knowledge to gauge the wearer's taste and financial status. As you prepare to leave the perfumer's workshop, he presents you with a tiny vial of his most expensive creation. Consider it protection, he says with a knowing smile, against the realities of the world outside these walls. The liquid inside costs more than a laborer might earn in a year. Yet among certain circles, it's considered as essential as food or shelter, the price one pays to exist in society without offending the collective nose. In a world where water rarely touches the body, scent has become both armor and weapon in the daily battle against one's own natural state. You're lying awake in a modest inn somewhere in 17th century England, trying not to think about the rustling sounds coming from your straw mattress and the occasional tickling sensation across your skin. Vermin, as constant companions, was not merely a fact of life during the great unwashed era, it was an inescapable biological relationship that shaped everything from furniture design to sleeping habits. Come morning, ULL join your fellow travelers in the common practice of picking lice from each other's hair and clothing, social grooming ritual that transcends class boundaries. The relationship between humans and their parasitic passengers reached unprecedented intimacy during the centuries when bathing was rare. You observe how lice, fleas, bed bugs, and various mites establish thriving ecosystems on human bodies and in their immediate surroundings. A physician explains to you that the average person in this era hosts 3 distinct species of lice alone: head lice, body lice, and pubic lice, affectionately nicknamed butterflies, heavy dragoons, and crab soldiers in popular parlance. For most people, complete freedom from these tiny companions is neither expected nor entirely possible. What's most surprising is how normalized this parasitic cohabitation becomes. You watch a noble lady calmly continue her conversation while discreetly scratching beneath her elaborate wig, where lice colonies flourish in the warm, unwashed environment. Her special silver grooming toolin, ornate lice comb lice ready on her dressing table. Its fine teeth designed to trap and remove the insects during her morning toilette. The wealthy don't escape infestation. They simply manage it with more elegant implements. One mainstream historical fact that illuminates this relationship is the development of specialized furniture. You sit in a newly fashionable fauteuil à la reine, a chair with an open, breathable back that discourages bed bugs from establishing themselves in the upholstery. Beds are designed with smooth posts and removable curtains that can be periodically boiled, while wooden floors replace carpets in progressive households, offering fewer hiding places for fleas. These design innovations represent tacit acknowledgement that eliminating vermin entirely is impossible. The goal instead is coexistence on more favorable terms. The medical understanding of these parasites yields a particularly quirky tidbit that leaves you scratching your head, both figuratively and literally. You consult a respected medical text from 1683 that soberly advises: a moderate population of lice upon the body serves as nature as bloodletters, drawing out corrupt humors that might otherwise cause serious ailments. Some physicians actually prescribe lice therapy for certain conditions, deliberately introducing the parasites to patients suffering from jaundice or lethargy, believing they will feed on the diseased blood and hasten recovery. Historians still argue whether these treatments ever showed any positive effects, or if the additional irritation simply distracted patients from their original complaints. Social practices adapt to accommodate these tiny companions. You observe how people in public spaces unconsciously perform what becomes known as the Burman shuffle, periodic shifts in posture and subtle scratching movements, so routine they barely noticed by others. In theaters and churches, you see specialized sticks with small animal paws or feathers attached to the ends, used to scratch inside clothing without the indignity of direct scratching. These grattoirs become fashion accessories among the upper classes, crafted from expensive materials and displayed as proudly as snuff boxes or fans. The battle against these pests inspires countless remedies and treatments, creating entire industries. You visit an apothecary who shows you his most popular preparations, mercury ointments that kill lice but slowly poison the user, herbal sachets to place among clothing, vinegar rinses for the hair, and dried wormwood to scatter in bedding. Most effective are the powders made from dried and ground pyrethrum flowers, imported at great expense from Persia. The wealthy purchase regular applications from professional exterminators who make household visits, while the poor resort to manual removal and home remedies of varying effectiveness. A fringe practice you encounter among certain rural communities involves deliberate cultivation of protective vermin. You meet a shepherd who explains his belief that maintaining a stable population of one type of lice prevents infestation by more troublesome varieties. The devils you know keep the devils you don't at bay, he tells you, demonstrating how he transfers good lice from senior family members to children in a ritual that makes you intensely uncomfortable, but apparently serves as a form of folk. Inoculation against worse infestations. The psychological adaptation to constant parasitic companionship fascinates you most. You notice how people develop an almost meditative detachment from the constant itching and irritation, their minds filtering out what cannot be changed. In a peculiar way, the shared experience of infestation becomes a leveling force in a highly stratified society. Duchess may wear diamonds, but she scratches just like a dairymaid. This creates a strange intimacy across class lines. Visible in the unself-conscious way, people will warn even strangers about a flea visible on their collar or a louse crawling through their hair. For children, coming of age includes learning to manage their personal vermin population. You watch a mother teaching her daughter to use a lice comb, explaining which eggs to remove and how to crush the adult insects between thumbnails, a skill as essential as learning to sew or cook. Boys are taught to apply sulfur ointments to their sleeping quarters and to recognize the difference between harmless house spiders and more dangerous arachnids. And by the 18th century, vermin management evolves into a complex domestic science with its own specialists and literature. You browse a popular household manual that includes detailed instructions for seasonal bug hunts, where furniture is disassembled, straw mattresses burned, and replaced, and entire households temporarily relocated to allow for fumigation with sulfur smoke. These labor-intensive processes become annual events in well-run households, marking the seasons as surely as harvest or Christmas. The long-term consequences of this close relationship with parasites extend beyond mere discomfort. You discuss with a modern-thinking doctor his observations that the constant scratching creates small wounds that frequently become infected, while the psychological toll of unrelenting irritation contributes to what he calls nervous excitability among the chronically infested. More ominously, he notes the correlation between body lice and outbreaks of typhus fever. Though the precise connection remains mysterious to medical science of the period, as you finally drift towards sleep, resigning yourself to the muted symphony of six-legged movement around you, you reflect that perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this parasitic relationship is how unremarkable it seems to everyone living through it. In a world where complete cleanliness is neither possible nor expected, humans have developed an extraordinary capacity to normalize what later generations would find intolerable, a reminder of just how adaptable we are to the circumstances we inherit. No matter how itchy those circumstances might. You're sitting in a prestigious medical lecture at the University of Padua in 1672, as to where a renowned physician is explaining the dangers of water contact with human skin. Medical myths and dirty theories represent some of the most fascinating justifications for the Great Unwashed Era. As you're about to discover, the professor, resplendent in his academic robes, gestures dramatically as he warns the students. Gentlemen, remember that water, especially warm water, opens the pores like little mouths, allowing disease to enter the body unimpeded. The medical establishment of Europe develops elaborate theoretical frameworks to explain why bathing is dangerous, creating scientific-sounding justifications for cultural practices already in place. You examine a popular medical text from 1650 that explains the four humors theory how blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile must remain in perfect balance for health. According to this view, water disrupts this balance by cooling the body's natural heat or washing away protective oils. The skin's natural crust, one physician explains with absolute certainty, is the body's first defense against pestilential vapors. One mainstream historical fact that particularly shapes bathing attitudes is the widespread medical belief in miasma theory, the idea that disease spreads through foul air rather than direct contact. You attend a medical demonstration where a doctor shows how hot water produces steam that can carry miasmas directly into the lungs and bloodstream. This theory persists with remarkable tenacity until the late 19th century, long after other scientific advances might have challenged it. The fear of miasmas leads to the peculiar medical advice that changing clothes too frequently is dangerous because it exposes the body to shifting air currents that might contain disease. The medical profession's stance against bathing creates a self-reinforcing cycle. You observe how people who rarely bathe develop skin conditions that worsen when they occasionally do washa. A phenomenon that reinforces the belief that water itself is harmful. See how red and inflamed his skin becomes after immersion, doctor points out during a rare therapeutic bath prescribed for a joint condition. The inflammation, actually the result of harsh soaps on sensitive skin, unaccustomed to cleaning, is interpreted as proof that bathing causes humoral disruption. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate alternatives to water cleanliness. You discover the rise of dry bathing, a practice where the body is vigorously rubbed with perfumed cloths, sometimes heated to open pores, then followed by application of scented oils. Medical texts recommend this method as providing the benefits of cleanliness without the dangers of water. One French physician's manual suggests dry bathing twice monthly for optimal health, while warning that water bathing more than twice yearly risks consumption, hysteria, and general wasting of the vital energies. The most bizarre medical theories involve the concept of consolidated filth as a protective barrier. You sit in astonishment as a respected doctor explains that the accumulated layer of dirt, sweat, And oils on the skin forms a crust of health that defends against environmental threats. Just as a fine patina protects bronze, he lectures earnestly, so does the body's natural accretion shield it from harm. Historians still argue whether physicians genuinely believed these theories or simply developed them to match existing cultural preferences, creating science that confirmed what people already wanted to do. You witness how class and medical advice intersect in fascinating ways. While physicians warn everyone about bathing dangers, they develop different recommendations based on social standing. For the nobility, whose refined constitutions are considered naturally delicate, even brief water contact might prove fatal. The working classes, with their hardier natures, might withstand occasional washing, though still not encouraged. This convenient distinction reinforces existing social hierarchies under the guise of medical necessity. The fringe practice of medicinal filthiness takes these theories to their logical extreme. You meet practitioners who deliberately cultivate specific types of bodily filth for supposed health benefits. One physician recommends that patients with respiratory ailments allow chest hair to grow long and unwashed, creating a natural poultice of oil and dirt that supposedly draws out illness. Another suggests that children recovering from smallpox should not be washed for at least a year afterward, lest the disease be driven back into the body. Most disturbing is the advice that wounded soldiers should avoid cleaning injury sites, as the body's natural exudations contain healing properties that water would wash away. Not all medical professionals share these views, creating scholarly debates that you find fascinating to witness. You attend a medical society meeting where a progressive physician cautiously suggests that moderate water contact in controlled circumstances might not be as dangerous as commonly believed. His colleagues respond with horror, citing cases of people who fell ill shortly after bathing connections that seem questionable at best to your modern understanding of disease causation. The dissenting doctor is ultimately dismissed from the society, his reputation tarnished by his dangerous hygienic sympathies. The few advocates for cleanliness often base their arguments not on hygiene, but on alternative medical theories. You read a treatise by an Italian physician arguing that certain skin diseases, which we now recognize as direct consequences of poor hygiene, require water treatment not for cleanliness, but to restore proper transpiration of vapors through the skin's surfaces. Even those medical professionals who accidentally stumble toward correct hygiene practices do so through flawed theoretical frameworks. By the 18th century, you observe the beginning of cracks in the anti-bathing medical consensus. Scientific advances in international travel, expose, European. Physicians to cultures with different hygiene practices and different disease patterns. You listen to a naval surgeon who has returned from Japan express astonishment at the Japanese practice of regular hot bathing. Noting the apparent good health of the population despite this reckless habit, perhaps he suggests cautiously, there are circumstances where water contact might be less harmful than we have believed. Such observations, accumulating gradually over decades, slowly begin to undermine centuries of medical opposition to basic hygiene. These medical myths about bathing demonstrate how powerfully theoretical frameworks can shape daily life, even when those frameworks are fundamentally flawed. You realize that humans often develop elaborate justifications for existing practices. Rather than changing behaviors to match new information, a tendency that transcends this specific historical period. As you leave the medical lecture, slightly itchy and distinctly aware of your own unwashed state. You wonder what current scientific facts might someday seem as misguided as the fear of bathing appears from a modern perspective. You're peeking through the window of a modest London townhouse in 1740, observing a most unusual scene. While most of society embraces filthiness as both fashionable and medically sound, you've discovered a secret gathering of hygiene heroes and rebels individuals who dare to challenge the crusty status quo. Inside, several well-dressed gentlemen and ladies hover around a copper bathtub, speaking in hushed tones as if discussing treason rather than cleanliness. In many ways, their radical views on bathing are indeed considered dangerous, even subversive. Bathe weekly without fail, confesses one gentleman to audible gasps from some of the newer members, is John Floyer, a physician whose advocacy for cold bathing has earned him both ridicule and a small but devoted following. You watch as he demonstrates his method, boldly immersing himself in water while explaining his theory that brief cold plunges strengthen the constitution rather than weakening it. The Romans built an empire on regular bathing, he reminds his audience. While we fear water like cats and wonder why plague revisits us so often. One of the most fascinating mainstream historical facts about these hygiene rebels is how they often drew inspiration from foreign practices. You meet Lady Mary? Wortley Montagu recently returned from Turkey, scandalized London society by adopting the hammam bathing rituals she observed during her husband, his diplomatic posting in Constantinople. The Turkish women have the cleanest bodies and the most brilliant complexions in the world. She tells the gathered rebels, yet our physicians insist that water contact invites death. Her private letters describing the elaborate Ottoman bathing customs circulate among progressives as almost semistat literature radical, foreign ideas too dangerous for public consumption. The clean rebels develop creative justifications for their unorthodox habits, often cloaking their hygiene in acceptable medical theories of the day. You observe a demonstration of therapeutic bathing, where immersion is presented not as cleaning, but as a treatment for specific ailments like gout or melancholy. By recasting bathing as medicine rather than routine hygiene, these early adopters find a socially acceptable framework for practices that would otherwise invite condemnation. I don't bathe for cleanliness, insists one elderly duke with a conspiratorial wink, but solely to alleviate my rheumatic complaint 3 times weekly with essential oils. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you learn about the Midnight Bathers of Venissa, semi-secret society of aristocrats who gather for clandestine cleansing after dark. You attend one such gathering where participants arrive heavily perfumed and depart similarly scented, their nocturnal ablutions leaving no social evidence. What began as a health experiment has evolved into something resembling a cult, complete with initiation rituals and coded language. Have you seen the full moon reflected? Is their innocuous-sounding query to identify fellow practitioners of regular bathing? The social consequences for these hygiene pioneers can be severe. You hear the cautionary tale of a Cambridge professor who lost his position after advocating daily face washing for students. Medical authorities condemned him for endangering young men's health, while religious colleagues questioned the moral implications of his obsession with bodily purity. Most hygiene rebels learn to practice their cleanliness discreetly, creating specialized bathing chambers hidden within their homes and scheduling water deliveries that won't attract neighborhood attention. Historians still argue about the true extent of these bathing rebellions, whether they represented genuine health concerns or were primarily fashion statements by contrarians seeking to distinguish themselves. You encounter evidence for both interpretations. Some hygiene rebels keep detailed journals documenting health improvements they attribute to regular washing, while others seem more interested in the social cachet of belonging to an exclusive, forward-thinking minority. The truth likely encompasses both motivations, with health benefits providing justification for behavior that also satisfies the human desire to feel superior to the unwashed masses. The fringe practice of sea bathing emerges as a medically acceptable form of water contact, one that gradually helps rehabilitate the concept of bathing more generally. You visit the developing resort town of Brighton, where physician Richard Russell has established a treatment center prescribing immersion in seawater for various ailments. Because this practice is explicitly medical and uses cold seawater rather than warm fresh water, it escapes much of the usual condemnation. You watch fashionable invalids being dunked in the chilly English Channel by specialized dippers, strong men or women who ensure the therapeutic shock is properly administered. The salt and minerals counteract water's natural dangers, explains Russell, providing a scientific-sounding bridge between anti-bathing dogma and practical hygiene. Not all bathing rebels come from the upper classes. You meet a community of English Quakers who incorporate regular washing into their religious practices, believing cleanliness reflects godly order and self-discipline. Their simple lifestyle and plain dress extend to unscented soaps and modest bathing facilities, approaching hygiene as a matter of respectful stewardship of the body rather than sensual indulgence. This religious framing provides some protection from criticism, though they are still viewed with suspicion by mainstream society. We are clean because we seek truth in all things, one Quaker woman explains. And the truth of the body is that it functions better when not encrusted with months of soil. The most radical hygiene rebels you encounter are those who not only practice personal cleanliness, but attempt to reform public health more broadly. You follow the early career of Johann Peter Frank, whose system of medical police advocates governmental responsibility for public hygiene, including access to clean water and waste management. His vision, far ahead of its time, imagines bathing not as a private vice or virtue, but as a public good, a perspective that would take another century to gain widespread acceptance. When you ask what inspired his unusual views, he gestures to a small personal bathtub hidden behind a screen in his study. Experience, he says simply. I tested the medical theories about water's dangers on myself and found them wanting. By the late 18th century, these scattered bathing rebels are gradually finding their voices and forming networks across Europe. You attend a meeting of the Society for Cleanliness in Private Life, founded in Germany in 1786, which shares practical advice on soap making, bathroom design, and strategies for introducing children to regular washing without alarming more traditional relatives or servants. They're pamphlets with innocuous titles like Household Management for Modern Families contain coded advocacy for revolutionary hygiene practices, spreading bathing rebellion through whispered recommendations and demonstrated results. The clean, it seems, are organizing a development that will eventually help transform European attitudes toward personal hygiene, though complete rehabilitation of bathing still lies decades in the future. You're navigating a crowded marketplace in a mid-sized European town in 1720, trying to manage the olfactory assault that is daily life, navigating noxious reality, the sheer creativity humans develop to function in perpetually unwashed societies impresses you. Even as you breathe shallowly through your mouth, a merchant notices your discomfort and offers a small pomandra, perforated metal ball filled with cloves, cinnamon, and dried rose petals. Press it to your nose when passing the tanner's district, he advises with the weary knowledge of experience. The apprentices haven't changed their clothes since Michaelmas. The practical adaptations people make to function in an unwashed world are remarkably sophisticated. You observe how greetings have evolved to minimize direct contact with particularly odorous body parts. The kiss on both cheeks, once common, has largely given way to elaborate bows and curtsies that maintain a safe olfactory distance. When closer contact is unavoidable, you notice people subtly timing their breaths to avoid inhaling when nearest to their conversation partners. These unconscious adaptations have become so ingrained that people perform them automatically. A kind of social choreography designed around managing smells rather than expressing genuine affection. One mainstream historical fact that becomes immediately apparent is how architectural design responds to the realities of human odor. You visit a grand home where the receiving rooms feature high ceilings, numerous windows, and strategically placed braziers burning aromatic woods. The vertical space allows the worst vapors to rise away from the nose, explains the house steward, while cross-ventilation prevents any single person's scent from dominating. You notice that chairs are often arranged in circles or semicircles rather than intimate groupings, providing optimal distance while still allowing conversation. In public buildings, you observe how mosaics and hard surfaces replace fabrics and carpets, not just for durability, but because they absorb fewer odors and can be periodically washed with vinegar solutions. Sleep routines develop particular adaptations to unwashed realities. You spend a night in a typical middle-class home, discovering that people rarely fully undress for bed, instead sleeping in lighter versions of day clothing that absorb body oils and can be changed more frequently than outer garments. Bed sheets are often sprinkled with dried herbs or vinegar water before use, and sleeping positions have evolved to minimize contact with the more pungent parts of one's bedmates. Always sleep facing away from your spouse, advises your hostess matter-of-factly. And children should be arranged head to foot like sardines. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate how people handle food preparation in unwashed conditions. You observe cooks using specialized long-handled utensils that keep their hands away from ingredients, while wealthy households employ specific servants whose sole job is ingredient preparation. These workers are kept strictly separate from those who serve the finished dishes. Dining customs evolve to include frequent hand-wiping on napkins, the use of serving utensils rather than communal touching of food, and strategic placement of strongly flavored sauces and spices that mask any hint of the cook's personal aroma that might have transferred to the meal. The management of human waste presents perhaps the most challenging aspect of daily life. You follow a night soil collector on his rounds, emptying chamber pots into large barrels that will eventually be transported to farms as fertilizer. In cities without adequate sewage systems, you observe the carefully timed garde-loo, warning shouted before chamber pots are emptied from upper windows into the streets below. The practical solution of designating certain hours for this disposal creates a rhythm to urban life. Nobody ventures out during dumping time without exceptional cause, and the well-to-do schedule their social calls to avoid streets during their most pungent hours. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of living in these odorous conditions. Whether constant exposure to strong smells eventually led to olfactory fatigue, or if people remained perpetually aware of the ambient stench. You find evidence for both positions. diaries that mention particularly bad smells as noteworthy events, but also accounts of travelers becoming physically ill when first encountering the concentrated odors of cities they had previously visited. The truth likely involves a complex adaptation where awareness of smells fades with familiarity but never disappears entirely, background discomfort acknowledged but rarely discussed. The fringe practice of odor mapping develops among the most sensitive or particular individuals. You meet a wealthy merchant who maintains a detailed mental geography of his city, organized by smell rather than visual landmarks. Tuesday afternoons, avoid the Eastern market, that's when they gut fish, he advises, and never pass the tanneries when the wind blows from the south. This olfactory navigation becomes second nature to urban dwellers, who plan routes and schedules around predictable smell events. Some particularly methodical individuals keep stench diaries, noting seasonal and weather-related variations in the urban smellscape to optimize their movements throughout the year. Romantic and sexual relationships develop their own adaptations to unwashed realities. You observe courtship rituals that involve gifts of perfumed items that can be held near the nose during intimate conversations. Lovers exchange handkerchiefs soaked in personal scents, allowing for gradual acclimation to each other's natural odors. It's a kind of olfactory courtship that precedes physical intimacy. Marriage manuals delicately advise on harmonizing bodily aromas through shared diets and complementary perfumes, treating body odor not as something to be eliminated, but as something to be managed and matched, like coordinating clothing or household. Child-rearing practices reflect pragmatic approaches to hygiene limitations. You watch a mother teaching her daughter how to wash with minimal water, a technique called barberess washing that uses a damp cloth to clean one small area at a time, preventing the dangerous opening of pores across the entire body at once. Children are taught from an early age to distinguish between public smells and private smells. This olfactory education is considered as important as teaching table manners or proper speech. Occupational adaptations prove particularly fascinating. You follow a midwife who carries a special paste of strong herbs to rub under her nose before attending births. Gravediggers chew tobacco or garlic to overwhelm the sense of their work. Physicians train themselves to diagnose certain conditions by smell the sweet fruit scent of diabetic patients or the distinctive odors of various infections. Even religious practices adapt. Priests conducting last rites for the deceased carry powerfully scented censers, ostensibly for spiritual purposes, but conveniently providing olfactory protection during their duties. By the late 18th century, you notice the emergence of new vocabulary to describe the complex reality of living in unwashed conditions. Languages develop nuanced terminology for different categories of human odor, distinguishing between fresh sweat, stale body odor, and the more serious miasmic humors believed to indicate disease. This linguistic evolution reflects the central role that managing smells plays in daily social interaction when bathing is rare. Olfactory communication becomes a sophisticated paralanguage with its own grammar and vocabulary interpreted as automatically as facial expressions or tone of voice. You're attending a society ball in Paris circa 1695, observing the mingling crowds with a newfound awareness of class distinctions and dirtiness. The ballroom is a master class in olfactory stratification, where wealth determines not whether one smells, but precisely how one smells. The aristocrats glide across the floor in clouds of imported perfumes, so expensive that a single fluid ounce might cost as much as a servant's annual wage. The middling merchants hover near the refreshments, their more modest scents creating a buffer zone between the elites and the few lower status attendees whose natural aromas have received minimal masking. One can place a person's income within 20 levers just by inhaling, whispers a dowager countess to you behind her fan. Her expert nose parsing the subtle indicators of social position that perfume, pomade, and unwashed bodies combine to create. That gentleman claims to be a baron, but his cologne is cut with alcohol rather than essential oils, definitely a pretender. The ability to manage one's scent becomes as important a class marker as accent, education, or dress. One mainstream historical fact that illuminates these class distinctions is how access to fresh linen, rather than actual bathing, becomes the primary determinant of relative cleanliness. You visit the household of a prosperous merchant family, where the master changes his shirt daily and the mistress her chemise every other day. This practice, known as the clean linen regimen, requires substantial investment, enough garments to allow rotation, servants to handle the labor-intensive washing, and sufficient fuel to heat water for laundry. A wealthy gentleman might own 30 shirts, while a laborer possesses just 2 or 3, creating an immediately perceptible difference in their personal freshness. Even though neither bathes regularly, the material components of cleanliness reflect this stark division. You examine the grooming implements of different social classes, from a Duke S. solid silver combs and boar bristle brushes to a Farmer S. wooden comb passed down through generations. The aristocrat's washing stand features porcelain basins and crystal vials of rose water for his morning face-wiping ritual, while the peasant makes do with a splash from the communal well before beginning the day's labor. These differences extend to dental hygiene as well. You observe how the wealthy use specialized tooth-cleaning tools and cinnamon-based powders, while the poor might rub their teeth with a cloth or chew on certain woods believed to freshen breath. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate how different classes manage their intimate hygiene. You discover the existence of specialized servants in aristocratic households known as royal bum wipers, who assist with the most personal aspects of cleanliness. Meanwhile, the working classes develop their own solutions, including moss, leaves, or communal cloths. Most fascinating is the middle-class innovation of dedicated, necessary papers, early toilet paper available. To those who can afford it, but considered an unnecessary luxury by both the very rich and the very poor, the sensory experience of class distinctions becomes most apparent in crowded public spaces. You attend a theater performance where seating is strictly segregated, not just by ticket price, but by olfactory impact. The boxes nearest the stage are reserved for the perfumed elite, the middle galleries for the moderately fragrant bourgeoisie, and the upper galleries for the minimally masked working classes. This arrangement creates an ascending gradient of natural human odor that theater veterans navigate with practiced nonchalance, while visitors sometimes faint from the concentrated aromas in the upper levels. Historians still argue about whether the elite actually achieved greater cleanliness or simply masked their dirtiness more effectively than the lower classes. You find evidence supporting both positions. Detailed records of aristocratic households show significantly higher expenditures on grooming-adjacent activities, but medical accounts describe skin conditions and parasitic infestations common across all social strata, The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The wealthy achieved marginally better hygiene through more frequent changes of clothing and greater access to grooming services, but still fell far short of modern cleanliness standards. The fringe practice of class-appropriate dirtiness reveals the complex social navigation required in this stratified society. You meet a governess who instructs young ladies from newly wealthy families on how to project the correct level of refined fragrance, neither to raw nor to exquisitely perfumed. Merchant's daughter should smell pleasant but modest, she explains. While a duke's daughter might properly overwhelm the senses, this calibration of personal scent to social position becomes an essential aspect of class performance, with social climbers carefully adjusting their olfactory presentation as they ascend the social ladder. Occupational distinctions create another dimension of dirtiness differentiation. You walk through a city, noting how trades create their own distinctive aromas. Tanners permanently marked by the chemicals used to cure leather. Fishmongers carrying the unmistakable scent of their wares. Blacksmiths identifiable by smoke and metal. These occupational odors function as both practical hazards and social identifiers, sometimes preventing workers from certain trades from entering establishments frequented by the elite. No tanners or dyers after 4 o'clock, reads a sign outside a middling tavern, establishing not just a class barrier, but a professional one based entirely on smell. The psychological impact of these olfactory class distinctions proves fascinatingly complex. You interview people across the social spectrum, discovering that each group develops theories justifying their particular position in the fragrance hierarchy. The aristocracy cultivates the belief that their natural bodily emissions are inherently less offensive than those of the lower orders, a kind of olfactory divine right. Noble bodies produce noble odors, insists one blue-blooded gentleman with absolute conviction. Meanwhile, working people develop pride in their honest smells, considering the heavily perfumed elite to be engaged in a form of deception that masks moral as well as physical corruption. At least we smell like what we are, a blacksmith tells you with dignity. Not like walking perfume shops hiding God knows what underneath. By the late 18th century, these class distinctions and dirtiness begin to shift as new ideas about hygiene gradually emerge. You witness early public health initiatives targeting the poorest urban areas not out of concern for the residents, but from fear that their concentrated filth might generate diseases that could spread to wealthier neighborhoods. This represents the beginning of a significant transition. Cleanliness slowly transforming from a purely private, class-based concern to a matter of public interest. The wealthy still maintain their olfactory privileges, but the frameworks justifying extreme differentials in hygiene access start showing the first small cracks. What becomes most apparent as you navigate these class-based scent distinctions is how thoroughly they permeate social interactions. The ability to tolerate or ignore certain smells becomes itself a class signifier. The truly refined person demonstrates their status not by commenting on odors that would overwhelm a commoner, but by appearing completely unaffected. You observe aristocrats conducting lengthy conversations in environments that would send a middle-class person reeling, the practiced indifference to extreme olfactory stimuli, serving as proof of their elevated breeding. In this unwashed society, even the perception of smell becomes a performance of class. With sensory tolerance as carefully cultivated as any other social grace, you're pressed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery of a crowded 17th century theater, experiencing firsthand the phenomenon of public spaces and shared stench. The air grows thicker with each passing minute as several hundred unwashed. Bodies generate a collective miasma that seems almost solid enough to touch. A gentleman beside you discreetly presses a pomander to his nose during particularly emotional scenes, not from theatrical sentiment, but because the audience's excitement produces a noticeable spike in the ambient aroma. Tragedies always smell worse than comedies. He confides with the weary expertise of a regular attendee. All that passionate weeping and fear makes people perspire most terribly. Public gathering places in the unwashed era become exercises in olfactory endurance, creating shared sensory experiences almost unimaginable to modern sensibilities. You make a tour of these communal spaces, starting with churches, where Sunday services bring together the entire social spectrum in close proximity for hours at a time. The wealthy attend with pomanders and scented handkerchiefs, while priests swing censers ostensibly for religious purposes. Though the incense conveniently masks the human bouquet rising from the congregation, you notice clever architectural adaptations, high ceilings to let odors rise away from the nose, stone floors that can be strewn with herbs, and windows strategically placed to create cross-ventilation when conditions become truly unbearable. One mainstream historical fact that shaped these experiences was the development of specialized building materials for high-traffic areas. You run your hand along the oak paneling in a courthouse, noting how its surface has been treated with beeswax and aromatic oils that both protect the wood and provide a pleasant baseline sent to counteract the less appealing contributions of anxious defendants and weary lawyers. Stone floors in public buildings are commonly designed with slight slopes and drainage channels, allowing for periodic sluicing with vinegar water, practice that manages accumulated filth without requiring individual cleanliness from the building's users. The management of collective odor reaches its most challenging heights in hospitals and prisons, where density, illness, and minimal waste facilities create truly legendary conditions. You visit a ward in Paris's Hotel GA, where the concept of hospital air has become a recognized phenomenon so distinctive that physicians use it as a diagnostic tool. When the miasma turns green-tinged in its scent, putrid fever is taking hold, explains a surgeon, completely serious in this assessment. Most astonishing is how quickly hospital workers develop selective olfactory fatigue, becoming immune to the baseline stench, while remaining sensitive to the specific odors that indicate changing medical conditions. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate the theater's intermission practices. You discover that performance schedules are designed around olfactory considerations as much as artistic ones. "We must break after the third act," explains a theater manager, as that's when the accumulated heat and vapor become most distracting to the performers. During these breaks, hidden vents are opened, aromatic vinegars sprayed into the air, and quick-burning incense sticks deployed throughout the space. Most ingenious is the odor reset technique, a brief, intense burst of a distinctive, pleasant scent that temporarily overwhelms the olfactory system, providing a few minutes of relative sensory relief before the gradual return of awareness to the ambient conditions. The sensory geography of cities develops in response to these shared olfactory burdens. You walk through a typical European town, noting how commercial districts are organized partly by smell compatibility. Spice merchants cluster near tanneries, their powerful aromas helping mask the leather-making stenches, while butchers operate downwind of residential areas by local ordinance. Urban planners of the era don't draw explicit smell maps, but their decisions reflect an intuitive understanding of olfactory impact. You observe how wealthier neighborhoods are typically situated upwind of industrial areas, creating a socioeconomic gradient that follows prevailing air currents. Historians still argue about the psychological effects of these shared olfactory experiences, whether they created stronger social bonds through common sensory trials or reinforced class divisions through differential exposure. You find evidence for both positions. Court diaries describing a certain democratic leveling when even the king could unescape the stench of a crowded reception. But also accounts of the wealthy leaving public events when the common vapors became too intense. The truth likely encompasses both effects, with shared smells simultaneously highlighting human commonality and the privilege of those who could most easily escape the worst conditions. The fringe practice of scent scheduling emerges among those most sensitive to public odors. You meet a minor nobleman who plans his entire social calendar around olfactory considerations, attending court early in the day before rooms become too ripe. Visiting busy markets only in winter when cold temperatures suppress smells, and avoiding theaters during summer months entirely. He shows you his personal stench calendar, marking annual events known for their particular olfactory challenges, including the notorious August assemblies, when the combination of heat and unwashed courtiers made royal audiences nearly unbearable. The truly sophisticated navigator of society, he insists, plans by the nose as much as by the clock. Public transportation presents special challenges in managing shared space. You take a journey in a stagecoach where 6 passengers are confined for hours in a space barely large enough for 4. The unspoken protocols are fascinating. Travelers position themselves based partly on personal fragrance, with the most heavily perfumed or naturally pungent taking window seats when possible. Conversation topics are carefully chosen to minimize exhalations. And rest stops feature not just physical relief, but olfactory rebalancing, a chance for accumulated aromas to dissipate before the journey resumes. The wealthiest travelers sometimes pay for empty adjacent seats, creating a buffer zone of fresh air that serves as an invisible but effective class barrier. Seasonal variations dramatically affect public olfactory experiences. You follow the annual cycle in a typical town, noting how winter brings relative olfactory peace as cold temperatures suppress bacterial action, and people wear layers that contain their personal odors. Spring thaws release months of accumulated waste frozen in streets, creating the notorious March miasmas that drive up handkerchief prices in local markets. Summer heat intensifies every organic process, making August the most challenging month for public gatherings, while autumn's cooler temperatures bring welcome relief. This seasonal rhythm shapes social calendars, with important public functions clustered in the more olfactorily manageable months of late spring and early fall. The most remarkable aspect of these public olfactory experiences is how they generate specialized vocabulary and social skills now largely lost to history. You listen as experienced socialites discuss the 3-hour threshold, the corner pocket effect, at the perfume battle. People develop nuanced techniques for breathing through the mouth while appearing to breathe normally, for positioning themselves near windows without seeming rude, and for detecting when a public space has passed from merely fragrant to potentially unhealthy. By the late 18th century, these collective olfactory challenges begin driving broader changes in public health approaches. You witness early experiments with ventilation systems in hospitals and theaters, the first municipal ordinances requiring regular street cleaning, and architectural innovations designed to manage air quality in crowded spaces. These practical responses to shared stench represent the first steps toward modern concepts of environmental management, addressing public health not through individual cleanliness, but through improvements to shared infrastructure. The unwashed masses remain unwashed, but their collective experience gradually becomes less overwhelmingly malodorous through these public interventions, setting the stage for more fundamental hygiene revolutions still to come. You're hiding behind a tapestry in a French chateau, eavesdropping on a romantic assignation between two young aristocrats. Love and courtship while wreaking presence, one of history's most fascinating paradoxes. How human attraction, intimacy, and reproduction continued to flourish, despite omnipresent bodily odors of the unwashed era. The young count approaches his beloved, pressing his lips not to hers but to her perfumed glove, gesture both romantically charged and practically sensible, given their mutual oral hygiene situations. "Your essence overwhelms me," he murmurs. And you're not entirely sure if he's being poetic or literally acknowledging her carefully crafted scent profile. Romantic literature of this period reveals the curious olfactory doublethink required for love to flourish in unwashed conditions. You browse through popular romantic novels where heroines always smell naturally of roses or violets, while heroes exude manly aromas of sandalwood or musk-convenient fictions that ignore biological reality. Poetry collections dedicate endless verses to women's sweetly scented breath. A literary convention so divorced from the garlic candy cane reality of most unwashed mouths that it constitutes its own form of fantasy literature. These idealized depictions create standards that real couples attempt to approximate through elaborate scent management rather than actual cleanliness. One mainstream historical fact that shaped intimate relationships was the development of specialized courtship perfumes designed specifically for close encounters. You visit a perfumer who caters to the romantic market, creating unique scent combinations meant to be compelling at the precise distance of intimate conversation. The young gentleman requires a fragrance that projects approximately 18 inches the distance between faces during a private dance. The perfumer explains, mixing ambergris, citrus, and secret ingredients. Most fascinating is how these romantic scents differ from everyday perfumes. It's designed not to overwhelm at a distance, but to create an enticing olfactory bubble that encourages closer proximity despite the underlying unwashed reality. The actual mechanics of physical intimacy develop special adaptations to accommodate hygiene limitations. You discover that sexual positions evolve with practical considerations and mind configurations that minimize direct exposure to the most pungent bodily areas gain popularity, while face-to-face breathing becomes something to strategically manage rather than romantically embrace. Marriage manuals delicately suggest timing intimate encounters shortly after the minimal washing that might accompany a change of undergarments, creating a narrow window of relative freshness. The wealthy sometimes employ love chambers fumigated with pleasant scents immediately before use, creating artificially fresh environments for their amorous activities. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate courtship gifts among the upper classes. Beyond the standard tokens of affection like flowers or jewelry, you discover the popularity of personally scented items exchanged between potential lovers. A gentleman might request a handkerchief carried by his beloved, not just as a romantic token, but as a practical means of olfactory acclimation by keeping it near for days or weeks. He gradually becomes accustomed to her personal scent, increasing the likelihood of finding her appealing at closer range. Some courtship rituals include the exchange of small vials of carefully constructed personal perfumes, allowing potential partners to assess olfactory compatibility before committing to closer association. The concept of the scent match becomes an unspoken but crucial element of successful relationships. You interview a veteran matchmaker who considers complementary body odors as important as compatible family backgrounds when arranging marriages. Some body scents naturally harmonize, while others create discord no amount of affection can overcome. She explains with professional certainty. Some families even arrange discreet scent meetings where potential matches are introduced in close quarters, with experienced older relatives observing for any signs of olfactory distress that might doom the union. Historians still argue whether these practices represented genuine biological compatibility assessment or simply a psychological preparation for the realities of unwashed intimacy. The fringe practice of aroma training emerges among particularly dedicated lovers. You meet a couple who have systematically exposed themselves to increasingly concentrated versions of each other's natural scents, believing this creates deeper bonds through olfactory conditioning. We began with handkerchiefs carried for a day, progressed to those carried for a week, and now can appreciate each other's most natural essences without distress. The husband explains proudly. His practice, while never mainstream, reflects the recognition that olfactory tolerance represents a significant component of lasting attachment in an era before daily bathing. Pregnancy and childbirth present particular challenges in the unwashed context. You observe how pregnant women often receive dispensation from normal scent expectations, their heightened olfactory sensitivity and potential nausea acknowledged as requiring special accommodations. Midwives develop specialized techniques involving strategic placement of strong, pleasant scents around the birthing area, both to mask inevitable odors and to provide focusing points for laboring women. New mothers receive gifts of particularly potent perfumes to help manage their postpartum period. When full washing remains medically discouraged but bodily realities intensify, the language of romantic compliments adapts to unwashed realities in fascinating ways. You listen to courtship conversations where phrases like "your natural perfume" intoxicates me or "your essence" outshines the artificial sense of others serve as coded acknowledgments that someone's body odor is relatively inoffensive compared to the general population. The most valued quality in a potential partner becomes not the complete absence of smell an impossible standard, but rather possessing a natural scent that proves subjectively pleasant or at least tolerable to one's prospective mate. This creates an element of biological roulette in courtship, where genuine physical chemistry plays a literal role in determining compatible matches. The disconnect between romantic ideals and unwashed realities creates rich territory for humor and social commentary. You attend a comedic theater performance featuring a character who falls in love with a woman from afar, only to be overwhelmed by her actual presence, a scenario that draws knowing laughter from the audience. Songs and stories feature romantic disappointments blamed on olfactory incompatibility, treating as common knowledge the gap between poetic descriptions of lovers' sweetness and the aromatic truth encountered in close quarters. This shared understanding creates a kind of collective coping mechanism through humor, what cannot be directly addressed in serious romantic contexts. By the late 18th century, subtle shifts in hygiene expectations begin influencing courtship practices among the progressive elite. You observe how certain forward-thinking circles start to associate minimal cleanliness with desirability, creating new social pressures that gradually counteract traditional medical warnings against washing. Young women hoping to attract husbands might risk occasional face and hand washing despite their mother's warnings about damaged complexions, while fashionable men begin experimenting with scented water rinses before important social events. These small changes, motivated by romantic competition rather than health concerns, represent early cracks in the anti-bathing consensus that has dominated for centuries. What remains most remarkable about love in this unwashed era is how successfully humans override their olfactory self-protection systems in pursuit of connection. You witness couples who genuinely appear not to notice odors. That would send an unprepared modern person reeling their sensory adaptation combined with emotional attachment. It's creating a form of selective anosmia that enables intimacy to flourish despite challenging conditions. This remarkable neurological flexibility serves as a testament to the human capacity for adaptation and the powerful drive for companionship that transcends even the most pungent obstacles. You're sitting in on an unusual meeting of the Royal Society in London in 1769, where a heated debate is unfolding about the potential benefits and dangers of water contact with human skin. The slow bath revival represents a crucial turning point in European hygiene history, where scientific advancement begins to gradually challenge centuries of anti-bathing sentiment. A physician named John Pringle is presenting findings that directly contradict established medical wisdom. Gentlemen, my observations suggest that soldiers who wash their bodies with some regularity suffer fewer fevers than those who maintain traditional abstinence from bathing. His colleagues shift uncomfortably in their seats, the radical notion competing with their lifelong beliefs about water's dangers. The Enlightenment's emphasis on empirical observation and scientific testing creates the first serious cracks in anti-bathing dogma. You follow the work of pioneering researchers who begin documenting correlations between hygiene practices and health outcomes across different populations. Most influential is the growing body of comparative studies examining cultures with different bathing habits, particularly the Ottoman Empire, Japan, and indigenous American societies. You review a groundbreaking 1750 paper that reluctantly acknowledges, while we maintain that excessive bathing weakens European constitutions, we must address the troubling observation that the frequently bathing Turks demonstrate remarkable resistance to certain contagions that ravage our populations. One mainstream historical fact that accelerates this scientific reassessment is the rise of statistical medicine. You observe early epidemiologists tracking disease patterns in urban centers, identifying correlations between poor hygiene and illness that become increasingly difficult to dismiss. Military doctors compile some of the most compelling data, documenting how units with even minimal washing protocols experience significantly lower mortality from disease than those following traditional no-bathing regimens. By 1780, enough evidence has accumulated that medical manuals begin cautiously suggesting that occasional water contact, properly managed, may contribute to the maintenance of health in certain constitutions. A revolutionary statement after centuries of warnings about bathing as dangers. The revival begins not with full immersion, but with the concept of targeted washing for specific medical purposes. You visit a progressive physician's practice where patients with certain skin conditions receive carefully controlled washing therapies. the medical framing making the taboo practice acceptable. We are not bathing, the doctor explains carefully, but applying a water treatment to affected areas only, much as we might apply a poultice or bleeding cup. This strategic rebranding helps overcome psychological and cultural resistance, allowing washing to return through the respected back door of medical treatment, rather than the suspicious front entrance of personal hygiene. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate how bathing is reintroduced as a foreign luxury rather than a health necessity. You attend the opening of a Turkish bath establishment in London, where the exotic cultural associations help overcome local prejudice against washing. Patrons discuss their visits as fashionable adventures. Rather than hygiene practices, I participated in the Oriental bathing ritual last Thursday, most invigorating and quite the conversation piece at dinner, by framing bathing as an exotic indulgence rather than a basic necessity. Entrepreneurs create a path for water to return to respectability without directly challenging entrenched medical beliefs. The design of bathing facilities evolves to address lingering fears about water contact. You tour an innovative bathhouse featuring graduated immersion systems, where clients can control exactly how much of their body contacts water, with careful temperature regulation to prevent the dreaded opening of pores thought to admit disease. Most ingenious are the new shower baths. Early shower systems that apply water briefly to the body's surface without the feared consequences of soaking. An inventor demonstrates his patented apparatus, emphasizing its safety features. The water makes only momentary contact with the skin. Insufficient time for humoral disruption, yet enough for the removal of surface impurities. Historians still argue whether the bathing revival was driven more by practical health observations or by changing social aesthetics. You encounter evidence for both positions. Medical journals documenting reduced disease and cleaner populations, but also fashion magazines declaring body odor increasingly unacceptable in refined company. The truth likely combines both factors. The empirical health benefits providing justification for a social shift already underway for aesthetic reasons. By the late 18th century, mild personal cleanliness is becoming a marker of enlightened thinking in progressive circles, associated with rational science rather than dangerous indulgence. The fringe practice of scientific bathing emerges among medical innovators determined to identify exactly what forms of washing might be beneficial rather than harmful. You visit a research facility where physicians meticulously document different bathing methods, water temperatures, durations, and frequencies, searching for the optimal approach that provides health benefits without the supposed dangers of traditional immersion. Their experimental subjects, mostly drawn from poorhouses and prisons, undergo varying washing regimens while doctors monitor their health with unprecedented detail. We have determined, announces one researcher with the gravity of someone revealing a profound discovery, that weekly washing of the entire body with mild soap and tepid water produces no detectable harm to the constitution, while significantly reducing parasitic infestations. The economics of cleanliness play a crucial role in the slow revival of bathing. You analyze how industrialization gradually reduces the cost of soap, makes heated water more accessible, and creates the infrastructure necessary for regular washing. Early textile factories discover that cleaner workers produce cleaner cloth that commands higher prices, creating economic incentives for basic employee hygiene. You tour a progressive manufacturing facility that has installed rudimentary washing stations, with the manager explaining. We find the small expense of providing washing facilities is returned threefold through improved product quality and reduced worker illness. These practical economic benefits do more to advance regular washing among working populations than any medical or social arguments. The language used to discuss cleanliness undergoes a fascinating evolution during this transitional period. You collect pamphlets and medical texts from 1750 to 1800 tracing how terminology shifts from dangerous bathing to water cures too. Hygienic practices as cultural attitudes transform. Most revealing is how washing is gradually decoupled from its association with sensual indulgence and moral suspicion, instead becoming linked with moral virtue through concepts of discipline and self-improvement. By 1790, religious publications that once warned against bathing's sinful nature now promote moderate cleanliness as reflecting godly order and proper stewardship of the bodhya. Complete reversal achieved through careful linguistic reframing rather than direct contradiction of earlier teachings. By the dawn of the 19th century, the slow bath revival has created a transitional state where regular bathing remains unusual, but is no longer considered actively dangerous or morally suspect. You attend a lecture by a progressive physician who carefully navigates between old and new understandings. While our ancestors wisely cautioned against excessive bathing that might weaken the constitution, modern science suggests that moderate, controlled washing provides certain benefits without the historic risks, particularly when practiced according to scientific principles rather than mere sensual indulgence. This careful bridging language helps society accommodate changing practices without admitting that centuries of medical advice were fundamentally wrong, a face-saving approach that accelerates adoption of new hygiene norms. What makes this slow revival particularly fascinating is how it represents not just a change in behavior, but a fundamental shift in how humans understand their relationship with their bodies and the natural world. You witness the gradual transition from viewing the body's natural state as inherently correct and protective, towards seeing the body as something to be managed, improved, and controlled through rational intervention. This philosophical shift part of broader enlightenment. Thinking creates the intellectual foundation for the more dramatic hygiene revolution still to come, when bathing will transform from occasional medical treatment to expected daily routine. You're touring a remarkable new housing development in Birmingham, England in 1840, where something revolutionary is happening. Each apartment contains a small private washing area with running water. The clean revolution takes hold, represents the dramatic acceleration of hygiene practices in the 19th century, when industrialization, scientific advances, and changing social attitudes combined to finally overthrow centuries of anti-bathing sentiment. 5 years ago, these facilities would have been considered an unnecessary luxury, explains the proud developer. Today, we cannot build them fast enough to meet demand. You're witnessing the tipping point where cleanliness transforms from occasional medical treatment to social expectation. The development of germ theory in the mid-19th century delivers the definitive scientific blow to anti-bathing attitudes. You sit in on a lecture by pioneering epidemiologist John Snow, as he presents evidence linking cholera transmission to contaminated water sources, demonstrating how microscopic organisms, not mystical miasmas, spread disease. This fundamental shift in understanding human illness undermines centuries of medical opposition to bathing. When dirt and bodily secretions are recognized as potential harbors for pathogenic organisms rather than protective barriers, the intellectual foundation for avoiding washing collapses entirely. One mainstream historical fact that accelerates this hygiene revolution is the industrial production of affordable soap. You tour an early soap factory where scientific understanding of chemistry has transformed what was once a small-scale artisanal product into a mass-manufactured commodity. Before 1800, soap was a luxury item, explains the factory manager. By 1850, its price had fallen by more than 2/3. This dramatic decrease makes regular washing economically feasible for working-class families for the first time. You examine advertising materials showing how soap marketing cleverly transitions from promoting it as a luxury indulgence to portraying it as a basic necessity, helping normalize the concept of regular washing across all social classes. The infrastructure supporting regular bathing develops at an astonishing pace. You explore the engineering marvels of municipal water systems being installed in major cities. Networks of pipes delivering clean water directly to neighborhoods that previously relied on communal wells or river access. Most impressive are the new sewage systems that efficiently remove wastewater, solving a practical problem that it made. Widespread bathing logistically impossible in urban environments. An engineer proudly shows you blueprints for London's revolutionary main drainage system, explaining, without the means to remove used water, regular bathing at scale could never have become practical. The invisible infrastructure beneath the streets makes the visible cleanliness above possible. A particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate the development of bathing appliances. You visit a showroom displaying the bewildering array of new technologies created to facilitate personal washing. Hip baths, shower cabinets, special soap dishes with drainage, washstands with integrated splash guards, and portable bidets. Most fascinating is how these items are marketed not just as practical tools, but as symbols of modernity and refinement. A salesman demonstrates a folding bath cabinet, emphasizing this is not merely a washing apparatus, but a statement of one's commitment to scientific living and progressive values. The aesthetics of these early bathroom fixtures reveal the transitional nature of the period. Many are designed to resemble traditional furniture, disguising their hygienic function to make them more acceptable in homes, still adjusting to the concept of dedicated washing spaces. The psychology of cleanliness undergoes a profound transformation during this period. You analyze etiquette manuals from 1800 to 1850. Tracing how body odor transitions from an unremarkable fact of human existence to a serious social transgression. A popular 1830 conduct book states unequivocally, "No offense to polite company exceeds that of perceptible personal odor," which marks one immediately as lacking proper self-discipline and consideration for others. This shift in social expectations creates powerful conformity pressures that accelerate adoption of regular washing far more effectively than health arguments alone. You observe how quickly people adjust their behavior when uncleanliness becomes associated with moral failure rather than merely physical condition. Historians still argue about whether top-down or bottom-up forces were more important in this hygiene revolution. You find evidence for both perspectives. Government public health campaigns promoting washing to prevent disease spread, but also grassroots movements among working-class mothers, establishing neighborhood bathing cooperatives for their families. The truth likely involves a complex interaction between official policies. Scientific education, changing social norms, and individual choices, all reinforcing each other to create rapid change after centuries of stability and anti-bathing attitudes. The fringe practice of therapeutic bathing evolves into the mainstream concept of preventative hygiene, You visit a former medicinal spa being transformed into a public bathhouse, its services reframed from treating specific ailments to maintaining general health. The director explains this conceptual shift. We once provided bathing treatments to cure disease. Now we provide regular bathing facilities to prevent disease, a far more effective approach. This transition from reactive to preventative thinking about cleanliness reflects broader changes in medical understanding. With regular washing, recast as a form of ongoing health maintenance rather than an occasional intervention for specific conditions. The economics of cleanliness become increasingly compelling as industrialization advances. You analyze business records showing how factories, mines, and other workplaces discover practical benefits to promoting worker hygiene, reduced sick days, improved product quality, and better public image. Some progressive employers begin installing washing facilities and even mandating basic cleanliness standards as conditions of employment. A textile mill owner shows you his company's pioneering hygiene policy. We require hands and faces to be washed daily, and full bathing weekly. The initial investment in facilities has been repaid tenfold through improved productivity and reduced disease transmission among our workforce. Educational institutions become crucial battlegrounds for instilling new hygiene habits in younger generations. You observe a school lesson where children learn hand-washing techniques, scientific explanations for cleanliness, and moral frameworks that associate physical cleanliness with spiritual purity. Most effective are the practical hygiene inspections, checking behind ears and under fingernails. Create both peer pressure and habitual behaviors carried into adulthood. A headmaster explains his philosophy. Children readily adopt new practices untainted by their parents' prejudices. By educating one generation properly about hygiene, we ensure all future generations will maintain these standards as unquestioned aspects of civilized life. By mid-century, cleanliness has become powerfully linked with national identity and imperial ambitions. You review colonial administrative documents that explicitly connect hygiene practices to concepts of civilization and racial hierarchy. European powers increasingly point to their bathing habits as evidence of cultural superiority, while simultaneously implementing hygiene campaigns in colonized territories as civilizing missions. A British official in India explains this perspective with disturbing candor. Regular bathing, according to scientific principles, represents one of the clearest distinctions between advanced and primitive societies. By introducing proper European hygiene standards to native populations, we improve both their physical condition and their moral character. This ideological framing of cleanliness as civilizational marker creates additional momentum for hygiene adoption within European societies, where being unwashed increasingly carries connotations of being backward or uncivilized. The clean revolution ultimately succeeds because it aligns multiple powerful forces: scientific understanding, economic interests, social status concerns, moral frameworks, and practical infrastructure, all pushing in the same direction after centuries of alignment in the opposite direction. You witness the results of this convergence in the rapid normalization of regular bathing between 1840 to 1880, when practices that would have seemed dangerous or eccentric to previous generations become unremarkable expectations. What's most remarkable about this revolution is not just the behavioral change itself, but how quickly society reconstructs its collective memory within decades. The centuries-long avoidance of bathing is recast as a bizarre, historical aberration rather than the normal state that it represented for the majority of European history. You're browsing through a ladies' magazine from 1910, smiling at an advertisement for scientific deodorant cream that ensures all-day freshness. The legacy of the unwashed era continues to shape modern hygiene practices in fascinating and often invisible ways. Despite society's collective amnesia about just how recently regular bathing became normalized, less than a century after regular washing transformed from medical heresy to social requirement products infrastructure, and cultural attitudes continue to respond to the lingering memory of centuries without bathing, creating a hygiene ecosystem that would be unrecognizable to your unwashed ancestors. The modern bathroom represents perhaps the most significant physical legacy of the great unwashed era. You tour a typical middle-class home built in 1900, noting how the bathroom has evolved from a reluctant afterthought into the second most expensive room in the house after the kitchen. Home buyers now expect not just basic washing facilities, but luxury bathing experiences, explains a real estate agent, showing off gleaming porcelain fixtures and multiple water sources. What's particularly fascinating is how bathroom design reflects a cultural overcompensation for centuries of hygiene avoidance. The sterile, white, easily cleaned surfaces serving as visual repudiation of the accepted filth of previous eras. The powerful associations between cleanliness and social status established during the hygiene revolution have transformed bathrooms into status symbols, where families display their commitment to modern standards through increasingly elaborate washing apparatus. One mainstream historical fact that illuminates this legacy is how hygiene products evolve from practical necessities into complex consumer categories. You analyze market research showing that by 1920, the average household used more distinct cleaning products than existed in entire communities a century earlier. Basic soap diversifies into specialized formulations for face, hands, body, hair, and clothing, each promoted with quasi-scientific claims about their particular benefits. This product proliferation reflects both genuine advances in understanding different cleaning needs and a psychological need to distance. Modern practices from the primitive washing methods that immediately preceded them. The complexity serves as reassurance that contemporary cleanliness represents sophisticated science rather than simply doing what humans had done for millennia before the anti-bathing era. The language of cleanliness preserves fascinating traces of historical hygiene transitions. You compile a linguistic analysis showing how terms like freshening up, clean smell, and filthy rich remain embedded in daily vocabulary long after their original contexts disappeared. Most revealing is how clean transformed from a primarily moral and spiritual concept to a primarily physical one, a linguistic shift reflecting deeper changes in how humans understand their relationship with their bodies. Particularly quirky tidbit emerges when you investigate modern bathing frequencies. You review sociological surveys revealing that despite unlimited access to bathing facilities, the average person in developed nations bathes approximately once per day, a frequency determined more by social convention than any scientific evidence about optimal hygiene. Public health researchers privately acknowledge that this daily standard has no particular medical basis, with several studies suggesting that less frequent washing might actually benefit skin health for many individuals. This arbitrary daily standard represents a cultural overcorrection to the unwashed era. Collective determination to establish maximum distance from historical uncleanliness, even when not strictly necessary for health. The psychological legacy of the unwashed era manifests in contemporary cleanliness anxieties that would bewilder our ancestors. You interview psychologists specializing in hygiene-related disorders, learning how conditions like obsessive hand-washing, excessive showering, and pathological fear of bodily odors have increased alongside rising cleanliness standards. We've created a cultural environment where normal human bodily functions are increasingly pathologized, explains one researcher. The natural human conditions wet, occasional odor, skin oils has been reframed as a problem requiring constant management. This perspective helps you understand how deodorant, originally considered a niche product for excessive perspiration conditions, transformed into a daily necessity used by over 90% of the population in developed nations by the mid-20th century. Historians still argue about whether modern hygiene standards represent genuine health optimization or culturally constructed. Overcorrection, you examine evidence supporting both positions. Clear public health benefits from basic sanitation and regular washing, but diminishing returns and even potential harm from the most extreme contemporary practices. The truth likely acknowledges both the legitimate health benefits of moderate cleanliness and the powerful cultural and commercial forces that have pushed standards beyond medical necessity. A historical perspective reveals how rapidly these standards evolved within 3 generations. Practices considered strange or dangerous transformed into unquestioned social requirements. The fringe practice of rewilding the human microbiome emerges as a fascinating contemporary response to the legacy of the unwashed era. You meet researchers studying how modern hygiene practices have dramatically altered the ecosystem of beneficial bacteria that naturally inhabit human skin and digestive systems. Their work suggests that while basic cleanliness prevents disease, the complete elimination of these microbial communities may contribute to rising allergies, autoimmune conditions, and skin problems. We've overshot the mark, one scientist explains, showing laboratory cultures of healthy skin bacteria. After centuries of insufficient hygiene, we've swung to excessive hygiene and now need to find the proper balance. This emerging understanding may eventually moderate some of the extreme cleanliness standards that developed as reactions against the unwashed era. The class dimensions of cleanliness persist in transformed but recognizable ways. You analyze how access to premium hygiene organic products, specialized treatments, high-end facilities has replaced basic cleanliness as a social marker. Now that regular washing is universal in developed societies, marketing materials for luxury bathing products reveal how they deliberately evoke exclusivity and status in their branding, creating new hierarchies of cleanliness to replace the stark clean, unclean divisions of previous centuries. Most telling is how natural scents have become markers of elite status, while strongly perfumed products are increasingly associated with lower socioeconomic positions. Complete reversal of historical patterns where powerful artificial scents signified wealth and status. As the memory of the unwashed era fades from living experience, its psychological imprint remains embedded in cultural attitudes toward the human body. You review educational materials, media representations, and public health messaging that consistently present natural bodily processes as problems requiring management. Sweating, normal body odor, visible skin oils, all natural functions, are framed as embarrassing failures rather than inherent aspects of being human. This subtle pathologization of the natural body represents perhaps the most pervasive legacy of historical uncleanliness, a persistent anxiety that without constant vigilance, you might slip back into the malodorous state that was once normal human existence. By examining the unwashed era and its aftermath, you gain a unique perspective on how quickly, seemingly permanent human conditions can transform, and how thoroughly societies can reconstruct their collective memory to normalize new standards. The historical pattern suggests that contemporary hygiene practices will continue evolving, perhaps eventually finding a more balanced approach between the unwashed extremes of the past and the hyper-cleanliness of the present. As you consider your own daily hygiene routine, the products, practices, and assumptions you've never questioned, you realize how profoundly you've been shaped by this invisible, historical legacy, carrying the echoes of centuries without bathing into your scented, deodorized, thoroughly modern life. You feel a pleasant heaviness settling over you now as our journey through the unwashed centuries comes to a close. The weight of history, like a warm, comfortable blanket, seems to wrap around you, bringing with it a profound sense of peace. Your breathing naturally slows as you reflect on how differently we understand our bodies today, how dramatically human experiences can change across time. There's something deeply reassuring about this cyclical nature of human knowledge, how we constantly revise, reconsider, and reimagine our relationship with the most fundamental aspects of existence. Let your mind drift now, floating gently between past and present, between wakefulness and dreams. Imagine the countless generations who lived their entire lives without questioning practices that seem so strange to us now. Their reality was as certain to them as ours is to us, a humbling reminder of how much of what we consider natural or normal is simply the particular arrangement of beliefs we've inherited from our specific moment in history. As you settle deeper into this restful state, consider how many of our current certainties might appear equally peculiar to future generations. This perspective is untroubling, but liberating releasing you from the need to judge either the past or the present too harshly. Human understanding evolves in its own time, like a river finding its way gradually but inevitably toward broader horizons. Rest now in this gentle knowledge, letting go of any remaining tension, surrendering to the quiet wisdom that comes with seeing our place in the long, meandering story of human experience. Sleep approaches like a trusted friend, ready to carry you into dreams perhaps scented with history's strange and wonderful fragrances, certainly filled with the profound peace that comes from understanding our connection to all who came before us and all who will follow. Good night. Sweet dreams. And remember, however peculiar our ancestors' hygiene habits might seem, they were simply doing their best with the knowledge available to them, just as we are today. Sweet dreams.